Hey everyone, we're gonna get started in a few minutes here, but if you want to, yes, I do need to update Chrome. I'm just nervous it's gonna take too long to get back into all this stuff, so I'm gonna do it later. If maybe it looks like if I'm pronouncing your name right, Mawash had posted in here that he's from Australia. If maybe anyone else wants to let us know where you're coming in from, what country, city, state, all that jazz. You can either just unmute yourself and let us know or throw it in the chat, whichever you feel more comfortable with.
Hi, everybody. I'm from Melbourne, Australia as well.
And is it Ilya?
It is Ilya. Yes, you got it right.
Yeah. Good evening to you. It's bright and early here for me, but I suppose most people joining here it'll be nighttime for you.
Oh, as they say, there's always beer o'clock somewhere.
Yeah, that'd be quite the start to my day at 6 a.m.
Well, unless you're in Prague, it would be quite unusual. Yes.
Welcome, Kyle. We're just gonna wait for everyone to jump in. We'll probably give everyone till like 6, well, I guess 6:02 my time. But wherever you're at, I suppose top of the hour plus 2 minutes.
Too easy.
Good morning, Michael. So Michael is for anyone that's already here already. He's the other Sumo Logic helper. So he'll be monitoring the chat. Looks like we have Julian as well. That just jumped in. Michael, it's 4 a.m. his time. So I really don't think you can get away with beer o'clock even in Prague, probably at 4 a.m.
No, I stocked up on some cold brew, so I got some nice strong cold brew.
There you go. I'm not sure if I would have gotten out of bed if I had to be up at 3:55 to help with training. Might have just done it from the bedroom.
Nice. Yeah. Hopefully I can squeeze in a little workout later today and join some more of the sessions.
Yeah, I had just enough time to go for a run. I knew I needed to do something to get the blood pumping this early to do a 3-hour training.
I think I can speak for everybody. We appreciate you guys' early start for us.
Sure thing. Gotta make sure anyone in the world that wants to get trained has the opportunity. Has anyone else, feel free to throw it in the chat or speak up if you're comfortable, done any other trainings so far during Illuminate, or maybe another good question, does anyone have any sessions that have been fun that they've listened in on?
I've got SIEM fundamentals certified yesterday, which was quite a good session, actually.
Cool. Yeah, it looks like Kyle also did CSE fundamentals. Cool. So we'll probably give everyone one more minute and then we'll go ahead and get the ball rolling here. So just as a heads up, during this. I think that, sorry, I just have a message to reply to. I'm gonna try to, I'll have Julian and Michael keep everyone that's not talking muted, but during this class, we definitely feel free to be interactive and talk up and ask questions and interrupt. And you'll just have to remember to unmute yourself. I'm sure everyone at this point, 2 years into the pandemic, is very familiar with Zoom and how to unmute, but if you can't figure it out, feel free to drop it in the chat. We can try to help out. Cool. So I think we gave everyone 2 extra minutes here to jump in. So we'll go ahead and get started. It looks like there's probably about 20 or 30 non-sumos in here. So thanks everyone for joining us and your interest in learning more about Cloud SIEM and being an administrator. So we're going to use the chat dialogue quite a bit here just to ask questions, get feedback and everything. So we're just going to start with, I'm going to start with a couple quick questions that are just yes or no answers. So first off, can everyone see my screen? Put yes or no into the chat, please. Looks like we got at least 5 people doing the training still and paying attention. There we go, getting some numbers there. Looks like everyone can see it all right. Cool, so next question, is anyone already have Cloud SIEM? Is it a Sumo Logic product that you use at your company? To answer Scott's question, yes, it should say Cloud SIEM Administration Certification. So if you see that, you're good to go. It looks like, cool, we do have some Cloud SIEM customers, and some people that have also done the CSE fundamentals. So we should have quite a bit of experience in the training today. So that's awesome. So next up, go ahead. Oh, maybe that was just an accidental unmute. So just to go over okay, so there's no introductions in the agenda here. So we'll do quick introductions on the Sumo side. So my name's Tyler Diedrich. I'll start my video for a second so y'all can see me. So I am a technical account manager here at Sumo Logic. So some of you that are already Sumo customers may have a technical account manager on your account. We essentially help all of the customers with all of their use cases and any technical issues that they run into. We also have a couple of helpers on, so I'll pass it over to Julian Bernard firstly for a quick introduction.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Julian Bernard. I'm working for the Sumo Logic Professional Service team, and I'm based in Montreal.
And then Michael Greaves is also on. If you could do a quick intro, Michael.
Hi, yeah, I'm Michael Greaves. I'm on the marketing team here. Thanks everyone for joining. Welcome. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to assist in the chat today.
And then the last person I recognize is David Duke. So if you want to do a quick intro.
Good morning. I'm a technical writer here at Sumo, and I'm going to be here just to hopefully answer a few questions.
Yeah, so all 3 of them will be able to answer any questions that I am not able to answer in the chat. So feel free at any point in time to drop any questions in the chat. So the course agenda, the first thing we're going to start off with is the Cloud SIEM data pipeline. So just walking through how data gets into Sumo Logic and how Cloud SIEM normalizes data and just sort of what all happens through that process. Second 10 minutes, we'll get logged into the labs. So from my understanding, everyone should have gotten a login to access the training environment with the administration, the administrator rights. So let's go ahead and use the chat again. Did everyone, yes or no, get some login information for the training environment? Okay, it looks like that is a no. So could one of the helpers, David, Michael, Julian, while we're kind of going through this first part, reach out to the training team to get the credentials that everyone should be using to log into this? if you could just, looks like Scott has one from yesterday's training. We maybe can use that, but yeah, if one of you three could reach out to the training team, Stacy and Josh and John, and maybe help out with that while the first.
I will ask them. Yes, I will do that.
Thank you. So then we'll go through data processing and configuration. So essentially, like the heart of this training is sending data into CIP, getting that data properly routed and processed by CSE, creating a mapping, and then creating a rule, I believe, is sort of the last thing that we do. So you're sort of going to learn the entire data flow through Sumo Logic, including the SIEM, and learn how to sort of manage that, edit things, make adjustments, everything along that nature. Yes, so yeah, I do have the labs PDF. I see Roberto's question in there, but in the labs, it actually said that everyone should have gotten a login, which every other training I've done, it says you should have gotten an email if you're taking this class. So Julian will figure that out for the login. That shouldn't be a huge issue. It's probably a shared thing, so everyone will be able to use it. Okay, so after we've worked out how to get data through the pipeline, processed and parsed, we'll learn more about customizing rules and tuning rules and other things you can do as an administrator in Cloud SIEM. And then, yeah, so I've kind of touched on this already. The final labs are creating custom rules and custom actions within Cloud SIEM. And then the last 60 minutes, so that first part should take about 2 hours. And then the last 60 minutes will be Q&A and giving you time to do all of your certifications. So the one other thing I want you to check me on, as I sometimes may be going too fast or too slow, is please just put in the chat either faster or slower. If you're having trouble keeping up, or if I'm boring you by going too slow and it's all too obvious. So maybe if everyone could either put faster, slower, or good on how the pace was on the agenda there and being able to follow along. All right, looks like it's good so far. Awesome. Thanks for the feedback, everyone. Cool. So let's get into the Cloud SIEM data pipeline. Skip over this. So as many of you may know, Cloud SIEM is Sumo Logic's cloud-based security and information management system. So what a SIEM is essentially a place for security teams to send logs to, normalize them, and then build out use cases to create alerts off of them. So the Cloud SIEM has some functionality that you don't have within just the base CIP platform. And the heart of it is basically the real-time streaming analytics engine. So later in the class, we will be building out some custom rules, and you'll learn how different use cases might be created within Cloud SIEM and how that differs a little bit from what you might do with like scheduled searches and monitors in CIP. And I hope everyone saw that Russell posted that the login is likely training plus admin. That's what I thought it was, but the doc was a little bit different. Okay, yeah, that one didn't work. So Julian will still keep working on that. Anyways, so the SIEM, the big differentiator between the CIP and CSE is the real-time streaming engine and the normalization. And then also obviously the UI is a lot different. If you haven't seen it, it's more focused around like what an analyst would care about versus someone that is just generally looking through log management. So the big idea here of what happens to my logs when I'm a CSE customer. So a lot of things stay the same. So for instance, collection, no change. Ingestion it's still all going through CIP. So your raw data, there's not really any change on how you collect it. So anything that you already have in the CIP platform, you can keep ingesting the same way you are and keep adding new sources the same way. So what happens then is when CSE is enabled, you get to determine which logs you want processed by CSE. So this is where the normalization happens. So parsing is basically creating a set of key value pairs for the log. So for example, a JSON event is pretty straightforward because it's already in key value pairs. So we can say foo equals bar, foo2 equals bar2, etc. For unstructured logs, you can use the same parsing mechanisms that you already have in CIP. So you can use FERs, and then you can create your key value pairs in that same way. And then you can use all of those in the mappings. So what the mappings do is CSE has a schema. So there's documentation on the schema. So you can see all of the schema fields. Maybe if one of my helpers could grab that doc from the Sumo Logic help site and throw it in the chat. And if anyone wants to take a look, they'll have that as a reference. But essentially there's about 250 schema fields that any data, any log can be normalized into. So some commonly used ones are like device IP, source device IP, desk device IP, source port, desk port, username, things like that. So any log that has these attributes, you can take them and map them to the normalized model. So this is nice because in CSE, all of the data is normalized. So it doesn't matter if you're sending in a proxy log, a firewall log, endpoint detection and response to a log. You know your IP addresses are going to be device underscore IP. Your usernames are going to be user underscore username. So it allows you to sort of write rules and content against them that use the normalized values, so you can cover wide ranges of data sources with single rules. In addition to the mapping, there is some enrichment. So for example, for IP addresses, we get the location and like the ASN and everything like that, and enrich it with that. You can also see like the entropy of the domain. So entropy is sort of a way to say how jumbled up something looks. So potentially like a domain generation algorithm could create sort of like auto-generate domains that look, essentially like jumbled up letters, and you can get that as well out of the CSE records. So from there, once we have our normalized records, we go and it's processed. They all go through all of the rules. And then if there's any matches, it creates what we call a signal. So essentially how rules work is there's 4 different types, which we'll get into later. So you can create match rules, templated match rules, and then there's threshold rules. And then there's chain rules, which are for a little more advanced use cases, than aggregation rules, which are for, I would say, very advanced use cases. So we'll cover all of those in much more detail later. And so sort of what happens is every normalized record that goes through CSE, it checks and see if it matches on every rule that you have enabled in CSE. And then when it fires, it ties it to an entity. So an entity can be any schema attribute that you define, but the most common ones are the IP addresses, usernames, and host names are probably the most common 3 entities we see. And then, so since everything is tied to an entity, it allows us to do some more correlation on top of that. So in a kind of first generation SIEM, like if you're familiar with ArcSight or QRadar or any of those other legacy SIEMs, this is kind of, the signals is kind of where the your alerts window would start. So you could have anywhere from thousands to millions of signals per day, depending on how many use cases you have built out. So the differentiator for Cloud SIEM is the extra correlation or clustering that happens to create the insights. So you'll sort of see this in action as you jump into the SIEM. But basically what it does is every time a signal fires, it checks how many signals have fired in the past 2 weeks for that entity. So let's say it fires on the username. The username is Tyler. It's going to say how many signals have we seen from we're tied to the username Tyler over the past 2 weeks. And if the sum of all of the severities of the signals ends up getting over the threshold that you have set, then it would create an insight. So sort of if you think of like your SOC funnel that is commonly seen, you have anywhere from millions to billions of records per day. And then you'd have anywhere from thousands to millions of signals per day. And then this is going to bubble up into anywhere from single digits to tens of insights per day. And this just all the true numbers end up depending on all of your data sources you have coming in, how many all the custom rules you have built out, and then sort of how you have your system tuned and everything like that. So I want to do a quick pace check. Was that a good pace for everyone? Just say good, faster, slower. And then also any questions that come up, feel free to ask them about anywhere in the ingestion pipeline. So it looks like pace is still good. And I'm going to give just another second in case someone's typing up a question that they had, or feel free to speak up if you have a question as well too. All right, I think we're good to go. So moving forward, I missed out on the awesome animations that I could have been using. So now I guess you get them. Okay, so our training environment, we're going to be apparently the Sumo Logic coffee company. And what we're sort of going to be doing is the first part of our labs is going to end up being showing how to collect logs. We're basically just going to use curl to post logs to an HTTP endpoint that you're all going to create. And if you're taking this class, I'm going to have a feeling that you're probably already a Sumo administrator and pretty familiar with this first part that we're going to end up doing. But essentially, yeah, we're going to use curl to post some fake logs to an HTTP endpoint and CIP. And that's going to be sort of our first step. So this first part is going to be something I'm assuming most of you are familiar with. So we will. Okay, so one of the big questions that as a technical account manager, I end up talking with customers about a lot. Before we get started, we'll just talk about data sources in the SIEM and things like that. So one of the main things that is kind of an ongoing conversation with my customers is what data sources do you have coming in? How much value are you getting out of those data sources? And sort of what other data source options do we have? So not enough data. It can be a case for smaller companies that just don't have a lot of sources. So Cloud SIEM needs quite a bit of data. Like I said, usually in the at least millions of records to have enough rules firing to end up creating the insights. So if you're only sending in maybe 10, 20, 30,000 records a day, you're probably not going to get very much value out of CSE. But if you're one of those customers that has just so many records and so much data and so many use cases that you're just kind of overwhelmed, CSE would be perfect for you. So sort of that leads into too much data. So you can send in data that's just sort of junk. A good example might be VPC flow logs. A lot of my customers will start sending VPC flow logs in, and then they'll realize they're not really getting much value out of them because they're essentially just saying this IP connected to this IP, and it's just essentially a connection log or a flow record. So one thing that we commonly will do is either put this data in a different tier that's not CSE, or pull a subset of data out of it and only send certain parts to CSE. So that's one thing that's good to highlight, is just because you're sending some source in. So a good example might be like firewall logs. That doesn't mean you have to send every log from that source into CSE. You can use FERs or other mechanisms to determine which data goes into CSE. So maybe you just want to send your threat logs into CSE. That's definitely an option. And the last thing is, so data types of data that you want to send to CSE. I kind of talked a little bit about this, but so data quality matters. So like I said, VPC flow logs, lower value, Palo Alto threat logs, or your whatever firewall threat logs are higher value. Something that is literally just notifications like guard duty or some specific Windows events can be very high value and at a very low volume. And then it's important to understand your data types and how they're structured and everything like that, especially as an administrator. So any questions? I'll give a second in the chat here in case anyone has a question that they're typing up in the moment, then I'll go ahead and go to the next slide.
Just, excuse me, a comment, Tyler. So for everybody, the first link I provided and the credentials are not correct. You need to check my last message here. You really need to use the training admin number at sumologic.com with the password sumo 2021 !
Thanks, Julian. Yeah, thanks for chasing that down. Cool. And so I didn't see any questions come in while Julian was talking there, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. So the next part of the system that we talked about, so messages, then we move into parsing, mapping, and enrichment to create records. So I sort of touched on this a bit earlier about how things get mapped to the schema. So this is sort of just like a fake, we're saying single sign-on log here. I guess this would be a host name or an IP address here. It almost looks like an AWS host name at times, but so here you see we have an IP address. Let's just roll with IP, a username, a successful login event, and then a timestamp. So as you can imagine, there's probably schema attributes in CSE for all of these things. If you remember earlier, IPs were definitely something I brought up. Usernames were something I brought up. And then this would be an event type. So maybe like an event ID or something like that. And then lastly, the timestamp, we parse out time in CSE to make sure we get the proper event time. And I think maybe everyone was chasing down, the helpers were chasing down the login credentials when I asked last time, but if anyone doesn't mind grabbing the schema attributes documentation and putting that in the chat, I think that might be helpful for everyone doing the training to have access to that. If you just search for CSE schema under the Sumo help, I believe it'll pop up. Okay, so this is sort of our raw log here. What do we need to do? We need to parse it out, get it mapped, and then the enrichments will just sort of happen automatically. So as we can see here, so as I mentioned earlier, the source device IP is one of the schema attributes in CSE. So basically we would be mapping, thank you, David. We'd be mapping the IP address to the source device IP. Next one, we can use this log. So maybe we use the successful login to determine that there was the threat level of low. And those were a couple of the fields that would have been mapped to the schema. Okay, so from records, we have rules. And then as we discussed before, all signals end up being tied to entities. So sort of kind of diving into that again, just to kind of double down on everything. So all of your rules, every record you create will attempt it to be matched on every rule. There's also some really good documentation on writing rules that we'll make sure to drop into the chat once we get a little closer to that. So every record gets attempted to be matched on every rule. And then when there is a match, it gets tied to one or multiple of the entities, depending on the rule, which one thing that is pretty cool about the CSE rules is you can associate them with one or multiple entities. So if you, for instance, say, this is interesting for both the source IP and the username in the log, you can create multiple signals off of one rule. And then lastly, the correlation and clustering we sort of already talked about in detail. So every signal is tied to an entity, and then every time a signal is created, we say, how many signals have we seen associated with this entity over the past 2 weeks? Or you can also customize that look back window. I have customers that have it set to 1 day. I have customers set it to 30 days. It's something that you can configure. And then when enough unique signals have fired to create the severity threshold that you're looking for, you have it set to, you'll get an insight. Okay, so kind of moving into how you give people access to the Cloud SIEM UI. So now all of you are with it. You all should be logged into the training environment, and you're probably already familiar with RBAC controls. But so I'm just going to log in and just kind of show you specifically how to get there. But there is a role in any account that has CSE that will be called View Cloud SIEM Enterprise. And then under there, you're able to select what you want people to be able to do. So under administration, then users and roles. Then if you click roles, you could do add role. So maybe this is my CSE training role. And then I basically just want to give people the permission to view Cloud SIEM Enterprise. And then under here, you have all of the different things that someone might be able to see within the SIEM. So insights, this is basically, you're going to want all of like your analysts at a minimum to be able to see this, and probably like your security engineers. And as an administrator, I'm sure you'll be able to see everything. Content, this is something you definitely want your security engineers. Okay, it looks like I need to slow down a little bit. Sorry about that, Clifton. I'll slow down a little bit. So content would be for security engineers. So this is managing like your rules, threat intel, match lists, and other things, custom insights, just anything that has related to do with signal generation or insight generation is under content. And then configuration, this is mostly going to be for your administrators and maybe security engineers as well. So this is a lot of where we're going to be spending our time today, is configuration first, getting data in, making sure that everything's parsing and being normalized, and then also making custom rules. So any questions about just sort of the roles that are available within CSE? Or how to get to view this? I'm assuming most of you are administrators already, so you're probably familiar with this page. I'll just give a second in case anyone's typing up a question. All right, looks like we're good to go. So this sort of, I already sort of covered the info on this slide, but just to double down, a lot of people will have multiple roles for CSE based on the personas in their SOC. So some smaller customers might just have one role. Everyone's an admin. I've seen that, where people have like 3 members of the SOC, and they basically, the 3 of them are all admins on the SIEM as well. I've seen others that have multiple tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, where tier 1s basically just see insights, tier 2 see insights and rules, and then tier 3 is more of like an administrator or engineer. So lots of flexibility with RBAC. Okay, so once you are in and logged in, one thing I want to, I guess I'll talk about this first, and then I'll go do the quick demo. So you can, once you're logged in, everyone should be logged into the training environment. Okay, thanks, Kyle. I was just making sure that wasn't a question there. Okay, so you should all be able to see this gear icon in the top right once you click over into CSE. So I'm just going to show you quickly how to get over there live here versus just this picture, because it's not super helpful. So basically you should on your bottom left have this button that says Cloud SIEM Enterprise. So if I click Cloud SIEM Enterprise here, it's going to take me over into CSE. Let me just go back one time, make sure everyone saw that. I kind of clicked quickly. So bottom left, right in between help and administration, Cloud SIEM Enterprise. Everyone should be able to see that. I'm just going to give a sec. Then when you click on that, it basically just takes you over to CSE. One other quick trick. For some reason, mine's not loading here. Is anyone else having issues transitioning over to the SIEM?
It's working for me.
Okay, it looks like Javier, Adrian. Okay, everyone else it's working. So I'm gonna try stopping my share for a second and maybe I'll kill my browser. Take Ilya's advice from earlier and update Chrome quick.
And let's run it again. And we got 25 in integer. So the addition of 2.
Sorry about that. That started up a YouTube video that I was listening to about Go programming. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen again. All right, let me log in. All right, log into training. All right, let me try clicking Cloud SIEM now. You know what? I think I know what the problem is. Hold on. For some reason, for some of us Sumos, if we're not on our VPN, we can't open CSE. There it is. I forgot about that. I don't, it's kind of a strange thing we have with Zscaler. For some reason, we have trouble accessing CSE sometimes if we're not on the VPN. Okay, so yeah, it's interesting, Sachin. We have the opposite issue. I had my VPN not connected, but if once I connected it, I'm good to go. Okay, so going back to what we were talking about. So when you pop over to CSE, you basically just need to click the gear icon. One thing to note, I believe your role is a little different than mine. I'm like a full-on admin. I can see everything, but you only basically see what you need to be able to use in this training. So I think there's probably a couple things. I'm not 100% sure what's missing here. Probably Sumo Logic, and maybe a couple others might be missing from your menu. But sort of the main thing we're going to be using is log mappings. And then we're also going to be, if you click content here, so if from left of the gear icon, click content, we're going to also be creating rules later on. So as long as you have those two, that should pretty much cover everything that we're going to be doing in this class. So let's pop over to the chat here. Can everyone just put a yes or a no in the chat if they're able to see the gear icon and the rules under content? I just want to give everyone a second to make sure they were able to get there. Awesome. Looks like everyone's all good. So the credentials are working. So popping back over to our training here. So I'm just going to make this Okay, so I kind of hinted at the content menu. So basically the content menu is going to be anything related to rules, threat intel, match list, and custom insights, and other things that you might consider content in your environment. So rules, we've talked a lot about. Rules, there's 4 different types. You can use different types based on your use case to just build out logic that fires when certain records come through. Rule tuning is sort of a cool feature that allows you to broadly apply tuning to a subset or all of your rules at once. So for example, if you wanted to filter out a certain username on like 10 different rules, you don't need to edit all 10 rules. You can create a tuning expression, something like username not equal to service account or something. So then you can filter that service account out on 10 different rules without having to edit a bunch of different rules. Threat intelligence is what it sounds like. It's a way to set up threat intel feeds. So you can manually upload things, use the API to upload things, subscribe to like a Stix taxi feed are the most common things. So from there, you're able to, one of the enrichments on the records is if there was any matches on your threat intel list. Match lists are ways to manage groups of different things. A common example might be like your administrative accounts. Maybe you want to tag the records with admin account anytime that the user is one of your admin users. So you're able to create different match lists. A lot of people use these match lists for like scanners or proxy IPs, things that are just kind of oddballs in the environment to make sure they're tagging them properly. And then you can also use the match lists in tuning expressions. So potentially you want to filter out any matches on signals that are your proxy IPs, because they're not really adding any value when the proxy IP is the entity, because it's literally just everyone using the same IP address. So you can sort of use match lists to manage groups and also use them in tuning is pretty common. YARA rules for file analysis. So if you have the network sensor, you're able to import YARA rules and do file analysis. So you can import these manually with single imports, or you can do from a GitHub link as well. Custom insights are what allow you to say, if I see either this signal or this set of signals, create an insight 100% of the time. I don't care what the severity is on the entity from the past 2 weeks with your standard algorithm. I just want to see an insight when X and X and X happens. So this is pretty commonly used for like your endpoint security tools that are pretty high fidelity type events, like your critical or high severity endpoint events. People use custom insights a lot for that. Or when people are thinking, if I see this event and then this event, like I probably want to take a look at that. Network blocks. So this is tagging all of your IP ranges. So it's sometimes nice to have them labeled. So different offices, which probably isn't much of a thing at the moment. Maybe people are returning to their offices. Maybe some people are remote forever. So common things, tagging different offices and things like that, so that you know, kind of without having to like do any DNS lookups or anything like that, where that IP is actually at, whether it's in Australia or the United States or Prague drinking a beer. If you were on for the first few minutes, you'll get that joke. So, and then a couple other things, suppressed entities. So if you just want to say, I don't ever want to see an insight from this entity, maybe it's some scanner or something along those lines, you can completely suppress it and an insight will never fire on it. And then you can also do that with lists of entities as well. So I know that was kind of a lot of content. Want to do a quick check. Any questions? I'll give everyone a minute to type up any questions that they have here, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Yeah, rules. So Scott, to answer your question, rules, rule tuning, and custom insights are probably everything needed for today's class. So that's why you only have those few things under content. So we'll be good to go there. Yep. Cool. So moving forward, I'm on the wrong screen. There we go. Okay. So this is what I needed. So this is the things you should see. So you should see, like I said, log mappings is all we really need out of the gear icon, and then actions as well. And also the Sumo Logic tab, which will help us configure our mappings. And then on the content, you should see rules, rule tuning, and custom insights. So Scott, it looks like you have exactly what you should have. So that's good to hear. So I'll give everyone a second just to leave this slide up, make sure we're keeping a good pace here to give you to double check that you have these 3 options on each of the 2 tabs that you should see. All right, if that was too quick, just let me know to slow down and I'll go back to this slide. And I'm gonna go ahead and keep moving. So sort of things that you're going to want to do between the 2 UIs. So in the Sumo Logic UI CIP, you're going to be adding collectors and data sources, writing field extraction rules, configuring partitions and data tiers, and then configuring data to go to the SIEM, and configure your users and roles. So as I mentioned before, any data that you already have coming into CIP, you're going to basically keep following that collection method moving forward. Nothing's going to change about that. Writing extraction rules to extract fields out, no change there. Same with partitions and data tiers. Something that may be new to you if you are a newer Cloud SIEM customer, or maybe professional services did all of this for you during your onboarding, is getting data to go to the SIEM, and then configuring users and roles. I'm sure most of you are familiar with as well. So in the Cloud SIEM UI, you're going to configure your log and ingest mapping. So saying essentially what we have to do is say, if it's this source category, it's this vendor and this product and this event ID. And we'll get more into that later. And then that essentially tells CSE which mapping to then use. Also in Cloud SIEM, you'll be creating your custom content. So rules, match lists, insights, things along that window, anything under your content tab. And then also customizing actions, context actions, and other workflows. So you can have actions automatically happen when insights are fired or on demand. So a lot of people forward them to a SOAR tool or something along those lines. Context actions, I don't think this class covers those, but essentially what they are is they allow you to pivot into other tools by sort of making a URL that is dynamic in a sense, where a field can be automatically populated in it, and it just pivots over. So it's pretty common to have context actions set up for like Virus Total, Shodan, other tools that you might commonly pivot to search for like an IP or something along those lines. I'll give everyone a quick second if they were taking notes or anything here, and then we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so everyone is already logged in, I believe. So we're going to go ahead and get the ball rolling on the hands-on labs. And then I think most of you have been popping over into the Cloud SIEM UI. I kind of skipped ahead on that. So we'll just kind of double check that everything's good there. So I think everyone's pretty much logged in, but if you're not logged in, can you please put no in the chat?
So you had the credentials on that slide.
Yes. I jumped the gun on that one. I just wanted to give you something to do, Julian.
Thank you.
Okay, so everyone should be logged in. We already sort of touched on this earlier, but if you go to the bottom left, there's the Cloud SIEM Enterprise button. You can click that to get over there. I think it seemed like everyone kind of was doing that when I was walking through it earlier. But I'll give maybe 30 seconds here just for anyone that didn't take the time to click around, make sure they get to Cloud SIEM, and you should see the gear icon and a few things under the content tab. So I'll give about 20 more seconds here and take a quick drink of my water and give you all a second to make sure that's all still looking good. Okay, so first thing, I think we've kind of already done this a bit, but basically explore options under configuration. Make sure you have those 3 items. Another thing that I did not touch on is the announcements. So all of the release notes in CSE all also pop up under that announcements tab. So if I go back in here under help, there's you'll see this red dot here is announcements. So this has all of the release notifications. So these will pivot you over into Beamer. I know this is a little different than what CIP uses for their announcements. I think in the next, it's coming soon that we're putting the 2 on the same platform. I think they're both going to get integrated with Intercom. But essentially, the most common releases that you'll see are all of these rules, log mappers, and parser updates. The content team is constantly making new rules and updating rules and new mappings and things along those lines. So you'll see these very frequently. You'll also see less frequently the application updates. So this is an example you'll see here. This says application API. So this will tell you any bug fixes or new features that get added to the UI. So it looks like there was just a couple resolved issues in this one. So those are the 2 main things. You'll see content and then also API, application API. So this one has an actual new update. So you can see what it looks like here when there's an actual update. So the rule tuning expressions, how they work, changed a bit. Okay, so, and then the help documentation, this is, you can access this 2 different ways through CIP, the kind of normal way that you would, and there's also a link under that same tab that had the announcements. And then lastly, the thing that's good to know about, so you know how to get to the SIM or CSE from Sumo Logic or CIP, but it's also nice to be able to pivot right back. There's sort of 2 things you can do. One of them is probably not the recommended way, but you'll notice the URL, you can change UI, takes you to CIP. And then if you just type in SEC or SEC, that takes you to CSE. If you prefer to click to get back and forth, you can click this. I guess it's, I don't know the term for this, but it's a 9 dots icon. Kebab, I do know, but the 9 dots, I'm not sure what that's called. You click that and then click Continuous Intelligence Platform. So if you've been wondering what is CIP that Tyler keeps talking about, that's sort of the acronym for Sumo Logic Continuous Intelligence Platform. And then that opens you up back into the CIP UI. And as we've already discussed, clicking Cloud SIEM takes you back to Cloud SIEM. So I think that should hopefully get everyone in a good space for navigating around, finding what you want. If you, I see we have a name for it, the double burger. Thank you. Thank you, Ilya. I'm not sure if that's made up or true, but I'm going to roll with it. The double burger sounds good to me. So I think everyone should have a good idea of how to navigate around now, hopefully. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat about any of that, but I think most of that is fairly straightforward, and you kind of we're probably able to click through it to get everywhere. Next up, configure and enable Cloud SIEM. So the first thing we need to do is get data from CIP into the SIEM for processing. So I'm going to try to there we go, we got it all. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that the backend configuration is done. So once you become a CSE customer, your account team or your professional services engineer will put in the request to make sure, well, they can actually just do all of the configuration to make sure your CIP account is all hooked up properly to your CSE account. So that's step one. The backends need to be configured to be connected. Next up is enable data forwarding. So this is essentially just setting a field on, you can do it at the source level, you can do it at a collector level, you can do it in a FER, whatever your preferred route is, and to get the right data in. There's no one way to slice and dice how to set the data forwarding. It's just based on what data you want to go to CSE. Next up, configure log and ingest mappings. So this is essentially saying data from this source category should be using these mappings in CSE. So as you know, in CIP, you can set your source categories to be whatever you want. So you could call I'm just going to use Palo Alto logs for an example. Your source category could be something long like network / firewall / Palo Alto, or it could be something short like just Palo Alto or PAN. So you need to first tell CSE what source category is what type of logs. So in CIP, since pretty much everything's custom and nothing is globally pushed out to all customers, you basically are just using your own source category and that's all you need. But in CSE, since most things are global and then you can customize it, you need to specify network firewall Palo Alto means Palo Alto firewall logs. So that's something that we'll do in one of the labs, and you'll get some better hands-on experience with that as well. So those are sort of the configurations you'll need to do to get things started. So like I said, we'll do that as part of the labs as well. So custom log and ingest mappings. So let's say there is no mapping for your data type. It's something new that CSE doesn't have anything built out for. The first thing you need to determine is this data structured or unstructured? So structured is essentially anything that has key value pairs. So it kind of lists them off here. Ceph, Leaf, JSON, XML are all considered structured by this Cloud SIEM. Anything else is generally going to be unstructured. So in addition to that, does the data have a syslog header? This is sometimes important for like Ceph or Leaf or other unstructured logs to tell the SIEM to know whether or not a syslog header should be expected. And then the next thing is, do you have field extraction rules being applied to your messages? So one thing you can do is use the values from your field extraction rules to map the data to the CSE schema. So let's say I have this log type, it's unstructured, but I already have an FER that parses out the IP, the username, and the threat name. I can actually just in CSE create a mapping that says use my field extraction rule values to map whatever you named the IP address, so IP to device IP, whatever you name the user, so maybe it's just username maps to user underscore username, and maybe you called the threat name the threat, so you'd map that to the threat underscore name value. And then lastly, what product or vendor do your messages come from? So I kind of hinted at this earlier with the source categories needing to be sort of told to have CSE say, if this source category is seen, this means it's a Palo Alto firewall log, or it's a Cisco ASA log. So these are just some of the things you'll need to think about as you're creating the custom log and ingest mappings. And I think this will be easier to understand once we go through the labs and you're kind of see the whole data flow and how everything works as well. I'm just going to give a second in case anyone was taking notes or anything, trying to be cognizant of pace here, not go too quickly. And it looks like we have the official name for the icon. It's a 3x3 grid, but double burger. I think everyone's agreeing on is more fun, or at least Ilya and I are. Okay, so the first lab we're going to do is enable data forwarding and send data to the SIEM. So essentially what I'm going to have you do is navigate to the Sumo Logic UI, add an HTTP source using your unique identifier. So, I mean, you can use like your full name as a unique identifier, use the number you use to log in. Just make sure that it's something that is not going to be seen double. The lab manual, I think I'm going to put this in the chat and then let me know if you can see that or not. I'm not sure if this is public. If someone could just put a yes or no, if that can be seen. Otherwise, I can download this. And I think I should be able to put that in. Okay. Yeah, let me try to drop this file in here. Okay. All right, it's uploading. Okay, so now everyone should have the PDF version of this. So maybe if someone could say yes. Okay, cool. Thank you. So yeah, the first thing we're going to be doing is setting up an HTTP source, checking SIEM processing, and then we're going to copy that URL for the curl that we're going to run to send data to it. So just to kind of walk through this, I'm going to use the double burger menu to go back to CIP. And then I'm going to go to manage data collection. So this is probably a page that you're all very familiar with. And then basically you'll see this admin training SIEM is the top collector. We want everyone to make their source under admin training SIEM. So you're going to click add source, HTTP logs and metrics. So just to create a URL to send data to, click that. So name, I'm going to do Tyler Diedrich. I don't think anyone else has the same name as me, so I'm going to assume that's unique enough. And then in this case, we're going to say we want this processed by the SIEM by checking this box. Another thing you could do, just to kind of give you a preview, is set this field. So you could set SIEM forward as true. And that would essentially do the same thing. So you could do just this as well. As an option instead of checking the box. So, but I would use SIEM processing, check that. If everything from that source, you're going to want to go to the SIEM. You might use the field probably more commonly in a FER or if this is not available. On some sources, it doesn't have this checkbox, so you can also add the field. So from there, just go ahead and hit save. We don't need to make any other changes. Just make sure your name is unique. And then also that SIEM processing is checked. One other thing that we are going to want, is a source category. So I'm going to use Tyler Diedrich as my source category. So your name and source category do not need to be identical, but just make sure that it's something, they're both something that is unique. Probably the easiest thing to do will use the source name. So from there, we can go ahead and hit save, and we'll see now my source popped up under admin training SIEM. So I'm going to give everyone about, I think this should maybe take 2 to 3 minutes to do that. So if everyone wants to just go in, create their source with a unique name and source category, and then either copy your URL if you remember to, otherwise you can always just go get show URL if you need to later. So if once you're done with this, please go ahead and put done into the chat. And then once maybe like I've seen like 10 of those, I'll assume probably everyone's done it. So I'll go ahead and be quiet for a second and let you do your thing. I'm going to give a couple extra minutes. At least one person had, I think, been logged in with the analyst account still. So I just put the message from earlier. If you can't see manage data collection, then you probably need to log out. So by click on your name on the bottom left, hit sign out, and then log in with those credentials that I just put back in the chat again. You should then see the collection page if you log in as the admin. So Russell, to answer your question, I will just go back into my source and talk through that again. So the easiest option for this is just going to be to check SIM processing. You can also do SIM forward as a field and set that to true. So I will go ahead and leave mine set like that, so that if you want to go look at my source, the Tyler Diedrich one, you can just hit edit on it and you can see that field. Didn't save, but it's SIM forward, and then you can set it to true. Looks like we have about 10 sources made. That's pretty good. I don't know why. I'm not sure why that field won't save for me. But yeah, I'll just put it in the chat too. All right, I know some people had a couple issues. I don't want to speed along too quickly if you're still logging in and logging out. So I'm just going to give a couple extra minutes to give people a chance to make their source. Looks like we've got about, I suppose it'd be about 20 people in here that doing the training, and about 10 sources made. So I'm hoping to get a little bit more closer to that 20 here, because this is going to be highly critical for understanding and being able to actually do the rest of the training. This is going to be sort of the base of the rest of the training here, is getting your source made. So assuming you want to get the full experience, I really need you to create the source to be able to post the data to. Okay, just to be cognizant of time here, I think it's time we better get the ball rolling here. So it looks like we have roughly 10 or so sources created. So that's pretty good. So we'll use these then to post data to be able to then kind of show off the full data pipeline. So going back over here, so source made, check, lab 2 done. Next, we'll send data to Cloud SIEM. So I'm assuming as an admin, the show URL link they show. I will answer your question, Clifton, in a second when I go back into the UI. So basically, you're going to need to open a terminal. You're going to need to enter a curl command, and we're going to send like a fake JSON log to our HTTP source. And then we'll be able to navigate into the Cloud SIEM and look for our record in the records tab. So I'm going to just I need to share, I suppose, my whole screen here so that you can see my terminal as well. I want desktop 2. Maybe if someone could just put yes in the chat, if you can see my screen, okay. Cool. Okay, so this is my terminal. If you are on a Mac, you can just type in terminal. You can use the out of the box one or iTerm. If you're on Windows, I'm sorry, I can't help you out. I don't know exactly how to open a terminal up, but I hope that you do. If you're using a Windows machine, I think you can just under services, use PowerShell or something like that. There you go. Yeah. So The equivalent of curl is invoke web request in Windows. Okay, so basically we're going to open the terminal now for the curl command. I believe this is in the training, the labs here. Yes, so you should be able to copy this out of the lab. If not, you can just kind of manually type it in, and it's not too long of a command. I can't copy it out of here, so I'm going to be manually typing it in. So to answer Clifton's question, to show URL, it's on the right side of your source. You should see these 3 links. You can hit regenerate URL or show URL, doesn't really matter. But you, yes, I can zoom in a little bit. So let me just make my screen. I have mine really zoomed out. Hopefully that's a little bit better. So, but yeah, here's your sources. On the right side, you'll see, so your source, make sure you're doing this one. You want to hit show URL. If you hit regenerate URL, that's going to change the URL you post data to. So you don't want to be doing that generally, but basically, yeah, show URL is the button right there. So then I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And this is what I'm going to be using in my curl command. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. So I'm going to do curl -d, that means data. So that's I'm creating this fake JSON event. So IP 127 localhost home .1 threat. And it looks like it wants you to make up an attacker name. So I'm just going to call Tyler the threat. And then what else do we have in here? It looks like that's it. So it's just basically a 2 key value paired JSON blob here. I will also paste this in. I was just going to say, yeah, I'll paste this in the chat when I'm done. So, okay, so that looks good. So -h, so this is the headers I'm going to send. So content type. JSON, so this is just specifying I'm sending JSON blob. And then the last thing is going to be your HTTP source URL. So this is going to be the full command that I'm going to run. I'm just going to send in the chat up to my URL. So you should be able to copy that and then paste it and then append your URL to the end, and that should work. So one fun trick I'm going to show you is to do a live tail while you do this. So I'm going to just open a log search using if I hover over my source and then click the blue box, it opens up a search. So it's searching for my source category. And then over here, you can click live tail, and then I'll be able to make sure my data is posting properly. So I'm clicking live tail. You can see that opened up a search. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter over here. And I should see my event. So I can send these a bunch of times and I'll see just events keep popping up. So you can see I ran the curl command 5 times. I got 5 logs. So I'm going to give everyone a couple minutes to take that explanation. Thank you, Kyle, for the Windows equivalent. We should probably add that to the training, because assuming everyone's got a Mac is not really a good idea. So thank you for that. So everyone, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to run the curl command. Please put something in the chat if you have an issue with it, or if you need some help with anything curl related. Or I suppose I should be OS agnostic and say curl or invoke web request related. Yep, you'll want to just go ahead and run the command from your terminal. Yep. And then maybe as people are finishing up making, if you were able to run the command successfully, see data, if you could just put done in the chat, please, so I can get an idea of where people are at. If anyone is getting an error running one of the commands that's in the chat, it might be helpful to put it in if you copied it out of the chat window, put it in a text formatter and clear formatting. Sometimes chats like change the quotes or something like that, so the quotes are not correct once you copy and paste it. So if you're getting an error when you try to run the command, that could be the problem. So I'm just trying to cherry pick a couple people that seems like they're done. So cool. So we have Ilya's data here. Just kind of show everyone off here. Nice job. Was Kyle? I don't have a way to. Kyle is training KP. There we go. So showing more people. Looks like we have some Mario themed threats here. There we go. Yeah, so going back through the process here. So we have our curl command essentially queued up. So we would write out what I pasted in the chat earlier, up to the point where we need to put in the URL. Then to get the URL, you basically just go to your source and then hit show URL, copy that, and then go back to your terminal, paste your URL here, and then just hit enter, and that should send the data through. Looks like cannot run. Okay, so we're getting a couple. I wonder if there's a. So anyone that's getting an error, let's try just using this curl website. So you should be able to access this. And I just want to make sure this works with mine. So yeah, the website I just quickly found there, if you take your curl command and run it there, you won't have any environmental issues. There's the. I'm gonna try copying yours and see if there's. So Loganathan, your content type is not quite right. So so this is what you need to do. I'm going to go ahead and post this. So that should be good. So that's your updated curl command there. Clifton, yes, let me go pop over here. Clifton, are you CPA probably? So I see a bunch of them here. So it looks like it did work. All I did was click on your source category here and it worked just fine. So I think you're good to go there. Okay, it looks like I see another couple dones. Loganathan, if you could just maybe say done when if that new curl command works for you. Yes, the curl website, I'll post it in the chat again. That might be easier. In the future, we might just want to have everyone use the curl website because it's probably more straightforward. Okay, so I hope with that, everyone has found a way to post data to the HTTP endpoint that you've created, whether it be through curl locally, curl with the website, or if you got it working on Windows, that's awesome too. Windows is my arch nemesis, so I'm happy for you if you're able to get that working. Okay, so moving forward, so the next thing we want to do is find this data in the SIEM. So while we haven't actually configured anything to get this data parsed or anything yet, we can still see it in the SIEM. So basically what you want to do is pivot back to CSE. So just as a reminder how to do that, hit Cloud SIEM Enterprise here on the bottom left. And then what I want you to do now is click records. So if you click records, you'll see this new page pop up and it's got a bunch of options for filters you can do. So what I'm going to do is use metadata, and this is kind of the only thing you can do at the current time, but once we start parsing it, it'll have a lot more to it. But then you're going to search for source, click down into source category. So you can also, I think, just type in source category and you'll see that pop up. And then basically what you're going to want to do is use one of these operators to find your log. So I'm going to do is Tyler Diedrich. And then we should see some of my failed records. So as you can see, I sent in 7 records and they all failed. So there's not going to be much here since nothing actually parsed, but you should be able to now do that. I'm going to, another cool thing you can do, so I'm just going to send this link. That'll take you directly to where I'm at and you'll be able to see mine. And then you can change, if you see where it says Tyler Diedrich in the URL, if you change that to your source category, you should see your failed records as well. So if you need a reminder on how to get your source category, you basically just go into CIP, click administration, or sorry, manage data, collection, and then your source category is right here on your source. So SIM 826, SJ 787, training 789, those are all your source categories. So nice, we posted 100 messages to the 14 sources over the past 15 minutes. So good on us, just generating some good amounts of data here. So if you want to either pop into the UI, click your way to the record search and type it in, please do that. Or feel free to just click the link that I put in the chat and then update the source category. And then if you can just when you found your logs, maybe just say found or not found in the chat. Looks like everyone's having great success finding their failed logs, so that's awesome. I'll give everyone another minute just to make sure everyone's got plenty of time. If you're looking for other things to do, you could start checking out other search options here just while you're waiting. So maybe you want to do object type is, you can have different object types. So I could look at all my network object types so I can see some parsed data here. So there is some live data being fed through the training environment as well. Cool. So it looks like we got about 7 found. So I'm going to call that good. So it looks like everyone's having some good success there. So moving on to the next step. So our next hands-on lab, I'm not sure why this has this weird layover on it. But our next step is going to be, cool, everyone found their stuff. Set up your ingest mapping. So like I said earlier, it's going to be taking your source category and then giving some identifiers to help the SIEM know which mapping to use. So over in CSE, if you remember under this gear icon, we have Sumo Logic. So if everyone can navigate to CSE, and you're probably already in there with the records, and then under integrations, hit Sumo Logic. So one more time, gear icon, Sumo Logic, and that'll take you. You should see a page that has ingest, and you will, I don't think you'll see the index section, but you might see index as well. Okay, so hopefully everyone is on this page now. So from here, once you've hit gear and gone to Sumo Logic, hit create. So as you can see here, this create is going to be asking for a few things. First is source category. So you'll use the source category that you put in. Format, as you can see, there's lots of different options here. Our data is going to be in JSON format, but you'll see there are some other formats, syslog, JSON, extracted fields JSON as if you have a FER that you want to use. Windows, a couple other things. So you'll put your source category in, pick JSON, and then vendor, product, and event ID. In our case, since we're making a custom mapping, can actually be anything. So I'm going to call this Tyler for the vendor, and then Diedrich for the product. And then the event ID can actually either be a static value or it can be dynamic. So in my case, if I wanted the threat name to be the event ID, I could use that value as my dynamic threat ID. But I just want to keep it simple. I'm just going to call this event. So every log that I now send in that with the source category Tyler Diedrich is going to be format JSON, is going to be like the identifier that gets added. Vendor is Tyler, product is Diedrich, event ID is event. So then you'll go ahead and check enabled and then hit create. So I'm going to give everyone a second to go ahead and make their mapping. I'll leave mine up here so that if you need to check back on what I have set, then you can do that. So use your name as your vendor and product, use Mario and Luigi as your vendor and product, use your favorite TV show character, use whatever you want. We're going to be making a custom mapping, so it really doesn't matter since we are going to have full control over how the mappings end up working. So like I said, I'll leave this open for another minute, and then I will go ahead. If you could just put done in the chat after you've hit create, I'll wait for 5 or 10 of those, and then we'll go ahead. Oh, wow, that one was quick. Okay, maybe we don't even need a full minute. I'll just give you another few seconds here.
Hey, Tyler.
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, how do I find how do I do the source category equals my category name to see the data?
Oh yeah, so I'm gonna pivot off of this just for a second here. So basically under your source here, right, you have this source category tab under your source. So you basically just find yours. So if you are training RVB, you would just hit this blue box here.
I'm 888. I'm the one below that.
Okay, so if you're HTTP 888, you basically would just hover over yours. You see this blue box. Does this blue box, when you hover over it, open up for you?
Okay. All right.
And then just hit open in log search. So just click that blue box. And then it looks like you sent a bunch of logs in as well.
Cool. Thanks.
Yep. Cool. So I think it looks like pretty much everyone is probably done. I got a lot of dones really quickly there on that one. So now you should all, I see some of your ingest mappings. Perfect. Let me just double check a couple of them. Looks great. Just making sure all the fields. One thing to double check here, make sure you've checked enabled. I'm going to do it for this person's source. So just go maybe double check yours, make sure you have enabled checked. It's going to look through a couple others. That one's enabled. Perfect. Okay, it looks like most others are enabled. Okay, so now if we go back and send another login, so whichever flavor of way you sent your logs in, go ahead and send a few more. So I'll give everyone a second to do that. And then basically we can now, we'll be able to open up our record search then. And we can use our new fields that we've tagged. So I could use metadata vendor is Tyler to find some logs now. Looks like Ilya gave away to send more than one log at a time there. I'm assuming that's what that is. So as you can see, this isn't going to be instant. It's going to take a minute to go through the data pipeline. I'll do a couple of refreshes and eventually this will pop in here. So let's see. I'm just going to go back to collection. Okay, so my 5 logs came into CIP now, so they should be showing up here shortly. Loganathan, I see you said you didn't see the create option. Let's go take a look at that. So just to confirm, you clicked the gear icon, then you clicked Sumo Logic, and then it should say create up here on the top right. Maybe if you could put yes or no in the chat on if you have the create on the top right.
Which icon I need to click? The corner right now.
Sorry, I can't understand you very well. The audio is a little choppy.
Okay.
Yeah, so you want to click the create up here on the top right. Yeah, so before that, it's the gear icon and then Sumo Logic. And then create, and then you'll do sort of what everyone else did with the source category and everything. Okay, so hopefully now we see some records that have my vendor. Ta-da! So, okay, so now vendor is Tyler. So I sent 5 more. They're still failing, but now they at least have a vendor, a product, and an event ID. So this is sort of our first step to getting data properly mapped. So I'm going to send you all this search, and then you should be able to replace the vendor with whatever you made your vendor, and then you should see some results as well. So sort of moving along here. So the next thing we're going to do after we've seen that is we're going to configure our log mapping. So we're still staying in CSE here. Basically under the gear icon, we're going to click log mapping. So one quick more rerun, gear icon, log mapping is what you're going to want to click next. And then you're going to hit create again. And what we're going to do is click structured mapping. So gear icon, log mapping, create, structured mapping. So then I'm just going to say Tyler Diedrich training as my mapping name. So you can name this whatever you want. It does need to be unique. So call it your source category. If you want, you could do something like that. And then from there, we're just basically going to configure everything. So vendor is going to be whatever we put in our ingest mapping. So if we're looking at this, we can basically just copy these values out of here. So I'm going to copy Tyler, I'm going to copy Diedrich, and I'm going to copy the event ID. So product Diedrich, format is JSON. So remember, we sent JSON in, format's JSON. That's all got to be correct. And then, so this is the event ID matches regex. So in my case, I can just do event since that's all the event IDs I'm going to have. But also a lot of times you want to create like a .star type mapping, which means any event ID that comes in. So if you have a lot of different event IDs, because maybe you set this dynamically, so maybe I did threat name instead, I could also have a .star mapping that would capture any of these events. I'm not going to save that, but that is another option. So I'm just going to do .star here since it's not going to matter. And then so I also need to select what the output type is. So you can pick any type of record here. I'm just going to pick notification since it's just sort of a notification I'm sending. And then match input vendor and product is sort of what you're going to pick for the output. In a lot of cases, you're going to be having data that is actually commonly seen. So if you were sending AWS data, you'd have that. And then you could pick from a bunch of different products that AWS has. And this makes sure that in these cases where you're using common data types, your vendor and product align with the other sort of standardizations that we've created in CSE. So, but for this one, since it's fully custom, you can just do matching input vendor and product, and it's just going to output exactly what it is here. Okay, so I'm going to give everyone a second to kind of get to this stage, and then I'm going to show you how we actually do the normalization section. So basically, what steps did I do? I hit the gear icon first. I click log mappings. I hit create. I hit structured mapping. I put in the name. I put in the vendor from my ingest mapping, product from my ingest mapping, format from my ingest mapping. I did .star to match any event ID. You could also, if you hard coded it to be something specific like I did, you could just put something like event. And then record type can be anything. And then vendor, you're going to want to do match input vendor and input product. So if maybe everyone could go through and get to this point and then put done in the chat, we'll go ahead, and the next part will be mapping our actual values. Okay, see quite a few dones in there, so that's a good sign. So I'll go ahead and kind of move on to the next step here. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to map our input values and then pick a schema attribute to output them to. So in our case, we have two values here. We have an IP and then a threat name. So my first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to map my IP address. So in our case, since it's just JSON, we're literally going to take the values. So the key here is IP, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to say, I want my IP value to be the device IP. So you could also, you can map it to multiple things. So I can map IP to source device IP as well. I can map it to any field that I want to, and I can do multiple as well. The other one that I want to do is threat name. So I want my threat name to be, let's see if there's any good ones. One nice thing about this is it tells you every schema attribute that is an option. So if you have an idea, it's probably threat something, or probably, I don't know, like dest. Like if you think you have a dest IP, you can kind of do that sort of thing. It'll give you all of your options. So I'm going to pick threat name since that's what I called it, and then add that field. So you can do that. There's other types of mapping fields too. So if you want to do an extracted one from like an FER field, you can do that. If you want to join two values together, you can do that. If you want to split it, there's a lot of common other things you can do. But the most frequently used thing is just going to be a standard or an extracted field. People usually aren't manipulating the values too much in the mappings. So once you've done the two or three that you want to do for your mapping, go ahead and hit submit. And sort of the cool thing about these mappings is they're easy to share. So next step is let's have everyone, once they've submitted their mapping, go ahead and put the link to their mapping. For sub attributes, yes, you use dot notation. So if you're, so if your JSON, say, was a nested object, you could do IP.foo for a value, Kyle, if that makes sense to you. So the nice thing about this is when the records come through, it's also going to show you what fields there were. So if you create a mapping with just a couple basic fields, it'll show you all of your options that you have in the future as well. So that is something that's nice about it. So I'm seeing lots of good mappings in here. Let me show off everyone's mappings here while we're waiting for everyone to finish. That one's mine. Don't need to show myself off. So it looks like Florian's got an awesome looking mapping here. Everything looks good. Yep, perfect. Another thing that you can do, if you were kind of feeling lazy or missed something, had to step away. I know everyone's got a busy work day and that's kind of stepping away to do training here. If you click on one of these mappings, you can actually also duplicate them. The only thing is, if you do this, you're going to disable the old one. So if you do duplicate someone's mapping, please go re-enable it, the original one, after you're done. All right, I see quite a few mappings in there. So I think we're good to go ahead and move on to the next stage. So now that we've set up our log mapping, we're going to go ahead and resend data again. So let me change this. So feel free to send a few. I could create something that sends a few, like I can't remember who sent that in there earlier, but that's probably a smarter way to go about that. So then again, we should be able to see the data coming in if we do a live tail. Cool. So yeah, data's coming through. That's great. And then in a couple minutes, we should be able to go back to the record search and do vendor is Tyler. So whatever your vendor was, eventually here, we, instead of only seeing failures, we'll also start seeing properly parsed records as well. There's my first one. So as you can see, now that our log mapping is in place and we have actual schema attributes, normalized values, we get something nicer. So this was successfully parsed. I have a notification type record. The source device IP is my home address, and my threat name is Tyler. And you can see this is sort of growing here. So first we had just like a source category and that, and now we also have these details populated here. So we have our classification and threat name, and now we have our mapping information, vendor, product, event ID. And then also the last thing is the extracted fields. So Kyle, earlier when we were discussing the nested JSON, the extracted fields is basically going to be anything that you can add to a mapping. So if you, for example, did like the IP with the nested object in it and it was foo, you would see ip.foo under the extracted fields as an option for something to use. So when in doubt, you can always create a very basic mapping, and then it'll show you all of the other fields that you have as options after that. So hopefully everyone's mapping is up and working now. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat if you have any issues. But that pretty much closes the loop on creating the mapping and being able to actually get the data parsing in the SIEM so that you can actually write rules against it. So I'm going to give everyone, it looks like we have a break coming up here. So since we weren't doing any configurations or anything, we have a break built in here. So I think we might be running a little bit behind on time. So I'm just going to do like a 5-minute break instead of 10. And then we'll jump into rules and writing a custom rule. So I think we're going to probably run over, the next section's probably going to take like 20 minutes. So we'll probably end up finishing a little after, quarter after. So you'll only have like 45 minutes for the certification, but I think it's better to go slow and make sure everyone does everything. So we'll do a 5-minute break. I'll start this 10-minute timer, and then we will, we'll be back after. Let me see if I can just cut this in half. There we go. So once this timer hits the end, we'll go ahead and pick things back up. Feel free to take your bio breaks, whatever you need to do, and we'll see y'all in a few minutes. Oops, I wanted to mute, not do that. All right, so there was our 5-minute break. I hope everyone feels refreshed and recharged. Maybe for you, that it's early in the day, finally awake here, ready to rumble. Later in the day, hopefully you're still staying awake. So next thing we're going to want to learn how to do is to customize and tune our Cloud SIEM environment. So the main thing we can do to do that is create rules and be able to create our own custom rules. So you can always edit the existing out of the box rules, but the SIEM becomes much more powerful when you have custom rules that are really catered to your environment. So we talked a lot about how the record processing pipeline works. When a rule fires, it creates signals, that sort of thing earlier. So since we're kind of getting short on time, I'm not going to double down on that. But we'll jump into all of the custom rule types first. So the first type is a match rule. So when a record matches a standard Boolean condition. So this can be anything, threat underscore name equals Mario, something like that. You could do anything along those lines with any of the schema attributes that are mapped. The next one is a threshold rule. This is for the use cases where you don't care about something happening one time, but you do care about something happening X amount of times. So maybe threat name equals Wario is interesting only if you see it over 10 times or something along those lines. You have different time windows to work with, and you also can change the threshold to whatever you need. The other thing that you can do with threshold rules is count distinct. So maybe it's not interesting if you only see one threat name 100 times, but if you see 10 different threat names, that is more interesting. The next thing is chain rules. So chain rules allow you to couple multiple pieces of logic together. So it allows you to create 2 or more expressions that you can also use thresholds on to be able to create more complex use cases. So the example here is a good one: 5 failed login attempts followed by 1 success in under an hour. So I think there's an out of the box rule that is actually very similar to that. It's, I think, more like 100 failed login attempts from a single IP address followed by a successful one in an hour or something along those lines. And then aggregation rules. So these are for very complex use cases, and it's not common that I have a customer come to me with something like this. But one thing that I have had someone need to use them for is if they're trying to say, watch for 4 different things happening and alert if 3 or more of them happen. So maybe I'm looking for threat name equals foo, threat name in one expression, threat name equals bar, and another one, threat name equals Wario in another expression, and then threat name equals Mario in a 4th expression. And then I could do a count on all of those. And I could say if count is greater than 0 for 3 out of the 4, then fire a signal. So as you can see, match rules are super common. Threshold rules are very common as well. Chain rules are a little less common, but have lots of valid use cases. And then aggregation rules are more rare, but when you have a use case that requires one, it's usually a very powerful use case that you oftentimes want to be alerted on every single time. So I will give just a second for anyone to type in any questions that they might have about all of these use cases and just kind of or different types of rules. And for if anyone's taking notes or anything like that, give you a second just to copy anything down, and then we'll move forward. All right, so we'll go ahead and keep on keeping on. So it looks like this is just showing off the main sections that you'll be using in the UI to create rules. So the first piece, you'll always see the one or multiple of these expression windows in here. So this is where you're going to write your logic. So like threat underscore name equals Tyler for if I was trying to fire on my logs I'm sending in. Entity, like I said earlier, you can select one or more entities. So in some cases, you might have records that have a username and an IP. So you want to select both of those. Some of them might have both, but you only want the username or something along those lines. So you can select one or multiple there. For match rules, you can do standard naming or templated naming. So it's actually pretty cool to be able to, I'm just kind of clicking through here, make sure I'm covering everything. to be able to templatize things. So if maybe you have like a threat category in your logs, you can put the threat category dynamically in the name. So it'll read the record and then put that in the name. So you can do that for match rules, but you can't do that for the other rule types because the other ones generally have multiple records associated with them. So this will look a touch different depending on the page you're on. And then for the signal severity, you can either set a constant severity or you can dynamically set it using a value from your logs. So maybe your logs have their own severity, like high, medium, low. You can set a severity mapping that's dynamic that allows you to say if low, severity 1, if medium, severity 4, if high, severity 6, or something like that. Get all these in there. Looks like I got everything. So best practices before making your custom rules. So always check for existing rules first. Usually doing searches will pull up what you're looking for in many cases. If not, you can always consult your account reps to try to get them to validate that you're not missing a global rule that might already be working. Know your system well. So you want to try to avoid creating too much noise. So you should always kind of use the search functionality to sort of validate a rule before you actually input it. You can also set rules to prototype mode, which means they won't actually increase the entity's risk score at all. So that's always recommended when creating a custom rule, just to monitor it for at least a day or two. Know your risk appetite and priorities. So this is kind of similar, just kind of know how much noise you're going to create going into it. Understand the different rule types well. So you should be able to sort of identify based on your use case, which type of rule to use. Make small changes as tests. So iterate over your rule and keep it in prototype until you're confident in it. And then lastly, I've said this few times already, but make sure to use prototype rules first to avoid any unnecessary noise. So feel free to drop questions in the chat, but I'm just going to kind of keep cranking through here. Okay, so, and then kind of a nicer visualization for insight clustering. So in this case, we're going to say each different shape here is a signal and tied to a different entity. So green square is an entity, blue circle is an entity. Okay, so maybe that's not blue to everyone. Maybe it's purple or something. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm colorblind. And then red or pink triangle is going to be another entity. So every time one of these new signals comes in, it's going to sum up the severities of these different signals and determine whether to create an insight. So depending on what you have your severity set to and everything along those lines, these are potentially going to create an insight, potentially not. So basically, in a simplest sense, 6 plus 5, that's 11, plus 7, that's 18. If you have your severity set to anything, or your threshold set to anything under 18, that's going to create an insight. 4 plus 1 is 5, plus 2 is 7, plus 3 is 10, and then plus 2 is 12. So depending on where your severity is at, that's going to create the insight. So kind of bubbling these into the actual, like grouping them together, you can see here based on the severity that we had set, this created an insight, this created an insight, but then this one did not. So 2, 6, 10 did not, severity 10 did not create an insight for us. So other customizations that you might end up making. So match list, I kind of went into this a little bit earlier. You use this to manage groups of entities or other attributes that you want to be able to use in a broader sense and sort of enrich your records with that group name whenever any of those values is seen. Custom insights. So, and your insight configuration. So you can change your look back window from the default 14 days to any day amount. I think it's up to 30 days. And then you can change your risk score from 12 to anything higher or lower that you would like to. Actions, create custom actions for insights. So you can have them execute a playbook with a webhook, or create a Jira ticket or send a ticket or send a Slack message when insights are created or on demand. And then workflows, the default workflows are new, in progress, and closed. For insight statuses, you can also set different custom statuses. So maybe you have triage, in progress, closed, and then maybe a tuning stage. So if you don't want to put it to closed, you want some tuning to happen first, maybe that would be a thing. Is there a way that would be the best practice? So Kevin's question, is there a way to gauge the sliding scale beyond 12 that would be best practice? Test, for example, what an entity could be if it went higher. So in your UI, it's going to always tell you the current state of all of the entities. So it's going to naturally show them by their current activity score. So this is, as of this moment, Napoleon Dynamite's activity score is a 7. Excuse me. And so you can use that activity score to sort of gauge like what insights might have fired if I changed my activity score. So hopefully that's helpful, Kevin. It kind of, if you just look at the entities page and then just see kind of what you have going on, that's probably the easiest way to determine whether a different threshold might be more interesting. In terms of changing the look back window, that's a little bit more challenging. You'd probably need to do some sort of query that analyzes all of the signals over the past different time window. So maybe 7 days or 30 days or whatever you're interested in. So if you wanted to go higher than 12, that is slightly more complex. I guess my recommendation for that would be to start small. So bump it up to 13, see if that gets you closer to the number of insights that you want to see. 14, just kind of slowly bumping it up. So unless you're just extremely overwhelmed with insights, it probably makes sense just to go up like one severity level at a time. Another thing that is relevant to that, so for insights that are generated, the severity kind of gives you what the activity score was. So if I click into this one, I can see that the severity was high. So low severity insights will be activity score of 13 and 14. Medium severity insights, I believe, are 15 and 16. And then high is anything 17 or higher. So you could look at how many high severity insight that you're getting. So I'm trying to do the math here. So this is 6, 8. So yeah, this one was 16. So yeah, I think that may be aligned with what I was saying. So all of your high severity insights would be ones that fired on 16. So potentially saying severity is high will give you an idea of how many you would have got if you set your threshold to like 15 instead of the 12. Okay, so kind of just keep the ball rolling here. I don't see any other questions. So back to the hands-on labs. So we're going to go ahead and create a couple of rules here and then create a custom actions button. So first, we're going to create a threshold rule. So let me get back out of this share here. So basically under content, we're going to click rules and then we're going to hit create on the top right here. So content, rules, create, and then select type threshold. So I'm gonna just name this same thing as I've been naming everything, just something unique because every rule has to have a unique name. And then I'm going to actually use something that I can trigger off of. So I had my threat name equals Tyler. So if you remember from the logs that I'm sending, and then I normalize threat name to Tyler. So if I send in these, I can get these to trigger. The other thing worth noting, your entity has to exist for a signal to fire. So I need to use the IP value that I used in my mapping. So I'm going to go open back up my mapping here. So, okay, so I can use either device IP or source device IP. So I'm going to use just device IP. And then summary, I'm just going to kind of just speed things along here. And then I'm going to set my severity to 1, and then I'm going to save this as prototype. So I currently just have it for 1 record. Let's go ahead and bump that up to 5 in 5 minutes. Okay, so if we kind of step through this, this is going to trigger when I have 5 records where the threat name equals Tyler in less than 5 minutes. And then the severity is going to be 1, and then it's going to fire on the device IP. So if I go ahead and hit submit, you'll see now I go taken to this new page where it gives my rule like a unique identifier and everything. So I'll give you all the link to that so you can kind of see how it all looks. And then I'll give you all a few minutes to go ahead and make your own custom rule. And I'm going to run my logs through and just sort of validate my logic here. So feel free to dump any questions that you have into the chat. I'm going to just go through and walk through for anyone that kind of missed anything, the process again. So first you click content up here in the top menu, then you hit rules. Next up is create on the top right. So I'm going to go ahead and click create. Select a rule type. You can pick threshold. And then you set a name. And if you were using the same JSON I can, you would do something like threat underscore name equals whatever you put in your JSON entity, whatever you mapped your IP address to, and then anything you want for summary and description. Severity, you can set to anything you'd like as well, and then save it to prototype mode. So I'm going to give everyone another minute or two, and then we'll jump back in. And as you can see here, it looks like my rule already fired here. So it created some signals already. This heat map here starts populating when your rule fires. And then you can also see down here, I have links to my signals as well. So if when you're done creating your rule, go ahead and maybe if you could just put done in the chat, so then I can kind of get a gauge on if who's ready to move on to the next part. Cool. Looks like quite a few people are done already. In essence of time, I'm going to go ahead and consider that, meaning that we're good to go ahead and move forward. So let's pop back into the slides. So next thing is to create a custom chain rule. So I don't really have with my minimal logs that I'm sending in anything interesting in terms of a use case to use to create a chain rule. So I'm basically just going to kind of make up something that that you might actually use in real life. So process is still the same: content, rules, create, and then I just select type chain. And I'm just going to call this training. So I'm going to say if I have a brute force attempt. So let's say I have 100 records where there's a schema attribute called success. And I'm going to say equals false. So I can use a Boolean or a string for this, both will work. But then one record where success equals true. So you can see my expression here, 100 where success equals false, and then one record where success equals true. So maybe this is also, this field could also be mapped for something other than authentication events. So another thing I can add to just kind of make sure this is valid. So I can add object type equals spell. So this is now going to say it has to be an authentication type event. So if you remember when we made our mapping, we called ours notification type events. So this allows you to say any event that's classified as authentication and the success is false or true. So I need to see 100 authentication events where success is false, and then one where success is true. So in my case, this is probably going to be interesting if it's on a user, an IP address. You might see a lot of noise here on this, especially with like shared IPs and everything like that. So for my summary and description, just to be quick here, I'm just going to use the same as my name, but you could obviously get much more detailed with that. Another thing that I hadn't mentioned yet is the tactics and techniques you can add as tags. So maybe my tactic is discovery, and my technique is, let's see, account discovery. So maybe I want to add those tags to this rule as well. So, and then last thing here, so for the order and then time frame. So chain rules are pretty cool because you can say it has to happen in this specific order that I've created them in, or it can be any order. So in my case, I don't really care if this happens in reverse order. If there's a successful login and then randomly a bunch of failed logins, that's not very interesting to me. So I want to make this in exact order. And then in terms of how long of a time frame, I could pick something different, but I actually think I like 5 minutes for this rule. So then lastly, I can save this as prototype and then hit submit, and then I have my rule. So I'll go ahead and put this in the chat for everyone so they can see a sample brute force chain rule. And since we're getting so tight on time and everyone had the chance to make the threshold rule, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of keep cranking through here and to finish up because we're getting pretty well over the 2 hours that was for the training section. So the next thing is creating an action. So actions are different things that you can have happen when you create an insight or an insight is created. So this will be under the gear icon and then under actions. So from here, you can see there's a bunch of stuff out of the box that has been added to the training environment already. We can go ahead and hit create to make a new one. So as you can see, there's different things. So I can get it probably the most commonly thing used is like an email action to like email the SOC or some admin or something along those lines. So email, maybe I would call it email on insight, and then I would want them every time they're created. And if I didn't, maybe I think that might be a little bit spammy, I can just email specific ones. So maybe I want to be able to forward them email Windows. So maybe I want to always have an option that I can forward an insight to my Windows admin team. if some certain activity happens, to be able to warn them about it. And then the other things you can do, sensor offline is not super relevant anymore. This is kind of just left over from when JASK was a different product and CIP wasn't a part of it. The other thing though that is useful is getting a notification when rules are automatically disabled. So the rules have circuit breakers that if you have over 100,000 fire in an hour or 1 million fire in a day, that they'll automatically disable themselves. We've sort of set those as thresholds where the rule is not really serving much of a purpose anymore. And it's just putting unnecessary load on the rules engine. 99.9% of the time, this is either happens because tuning is needed or there was actually an incident happening when this happens. So these rules getting disabled are actually usually pretty interesting things to look at. Last thing, you just need to set them to active to make sure that they actually happen. And then you would need to, in this case, put in a comma separated list of recipients, and then you'd be able to hit create. Other options you have, you can do HTTP posts. So post the payload to whatever endpoint you want. This has some different options for authentication as well. And then there's different things. So you can do Slack, PagerDuty, MS Teams, lots of different things here for when insights fire or when the rules get disabled. So I'll give everyone a second to just kind of go click into the actions tab. So it's under the gear icon and then actions. Feel free to hit create, make one if you'd like to. But I'm not gonna give too much time here since like I've said before, we're running very late on time. So last thing, so what's next? So you can configure your data ingestion pipeline now. So you should feel pretty comfortable getting data into CIP, making sure that it's being set up to process by the SIEM, setting your ingest config and mappings, making sure your records are parsing, and then creating rules off of them. You should feel comfortable creating new roles for your team using RBAC and CIP and creating basic custom content for your SOC team. I would recommend working with your account team the first few times you're making new rules, just to make sure you kind of are configuring everything right and have them just do a quick double check on it. And then lastly, get the certification. And keep learning and keep asking Sumo Logic, your account team, questions about how to better improve your environment. So last thing before we kick over to the assessment, is there any questions that anyone has? I know you've been just popping them in the chat for the most part, but I do want to give a minute here to allow people to ask questions if there is any. Okay, I don't see anything or hear anything yet, so we're good to go there. And then, so the last thing here, which we have about, sorry for making the time. For the exam attempts, I think it's unlimited attempts. I don't think there's a limit on that. So, but for taking the assessment, you'll want to go log out of the training environment and log into your own Sumo Logic environment. So you'll want to go on the bottom left here, click sign out, and then go log into your Sumo environment. So I'd click sign out here, and then I would sign in. So I'm not going to be able to do this myself since actually I have this other Sumo account that I can log into. So from logging, you'll want to log into your own Sumo account. Then you'll hit certification here. So what I did was I hit home, certification, get certified, and this will take you over to SkillJar, which will come up as learn.sumologic.com. And then you will click Cloud SIEM, and then you will click, where is the admin exam here? So looks like you get 61 minutes to do it. And we'll leave this Zoom open so you can ask questions in the chat, and also you can just speak up and ask questions if you'd like. But the last, I guess, 35 minutes that is left here is for you to go get certified and get your Cloud SIEM administration certification. So like I said, we'll leave this Zoom open for up until the top of the hour here. But otherwise, I really appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about the Cloud SIEM and how to be an administrator. And we will let you go ahead and get certified here. So I hope everyone has good luck on the exam. Like I said, open book for everything. You feel free to use the help docs. Feel free to ask us questions. We'll be on here for the next 30 minutes. So thanks everybody. And I'll be quiet now and let you go ahead and take your exams.